Thank you for joining us for our August 2023 Q&A talk. I'm tonight's host, Q&A Talks Program Coordinator Cody McRae-Cullum. My personal pronouns are he, him, but if you're feeling bold, feel free to address me with my preferred pronoun, royal we. Q&A Talks connect rural parents and caregivers of LGBTQIA+ youth with the resources they need to ensure their children can grow up safely and authentically. Q&A Talks is an initiative of Project Q&A and is made possible by grants from the Independence Area Community Chest and the American Library Association's Libraries Transform Communities Focus on Rural and Small Library Grant in partnership with the Independence Public Library. Tonight, we are pleased to have Taté Walker, Tajahnaé Stocker, and Leslie Fox. Taté Walker, they, them, Ina, is a Lakota citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe of South Dakota. They are an award-winning two-spirit storyteller for magazine outlets, news publications, and anthologies. Taté is the author of The Trickster Riots, a full-length poetry collection from Abalone Mountain Press. Tajahnaé Stocker, they, them, is an agender community organizer, writer, and policy advocate based in Wichita, Kansas. Tajahnaé centers their experience as a Black, queer, agender person to bridge the gap between impacted Kansans and policy and advocacy. Tajahnaé believes in a world of radical empathy, abolition, and collectivism. Using a Black, feminist, and class solidarity lens, they aim to dismantle all forms of racial and wealth injustice and fight for the liberation of all people through centering lived and living expertise. Leslie Fox, they, them, is a community organizer and nonprofit administrator with a bachelor's degree in anthropology. Leslie homeschools a neurodivergent child and has served as a pagan community leader for over 10 years. A fun fact about Leslie is that they raise fancy chickens. Please welcome Taté Walker, Tajahnaé Stocker, and Leslie Fox. So tonight we're holding a panel discussion, and to begin our discussion, I will be defining a few terms necessary to understanding a few different concepts of the idea of gender. I would like to note that I am directly quoting an NPR article compiled by Laurel Wamsley, A Guide to Gender Identity Terms. Sex refers to a person's biological status and is typically assigned at birth, usually on the basis of external anatomy. Sex is typically categorized as male, female, or intersex. Gender is often defined as a social construct of norms, behaviors, and roles that varies between societies and over time. Gender is often categorized as male, female, or non-binary. Gender identity is one's own internal sense of self and their gender, whether that is man, woman, neither, or both. Unlike gender expression, gender identity is not outwardly visible to others. For most people, gender identity aligns with the sex assigned at birth, the American Psychological Association notes. For transgender people, gender identity differs in varying degrees from the sex assigned at birth. Gender expression is how a person presents gender outwardly through behavior, clothing, voice, or other perceived characteristics. Society often defines these cues as masculine or feminine, though what is considered masculine or feminine changes over time and varies by culture. Cisgender, or simply cis, is an adjective that describes a person whose gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. Transgender, or simply trans, is an adjective used to describe someone whose gender identity differs from the sex assigned at birth. Transgender man, for example, is someone who is listed as female at birth, but whose gender identity is male. Cisgender and transgender have their roots in Latin-derived prefixes of cis and trans. Cis meaning on this side of, and trans meaning across from or on the other side of. Both adjectives are used to describe experiences of someone's gender identity. Non-binary is a term that can be used by people who do not describe themselves or their genders as fitting into the categories of man or woman. A range of terms that are used to refer to these experiences, non-binary and genderqueer, are among the terms that are sometimes used. Agender is an adjective that can describe a person who does not identify as any gender. Gender expansive is an adjective that can describe someone with a more flexible gender identity than might be associated with a typical gender binary. Gender transition is a process a person may take to bring themselves and or their bodies into alignment with their gender identity. It's not just one step. Transitioning can include any, none, or all of the following: telling one's friends, family, and coworkers, changing one's name and pronouns, updating legal documents, medical interventions such as hormone therapy and or surgical intervention, often called gender confirmation surgery. Gender dysphoria refers to psychological distress that results from an incongruence between one's sex assigned at birth and one's gender identity. Not all trans people experience dysphoria, and those who do experience it may experience it at varying levels of intensity. Gender dysphoria is a diagnosis listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM. Some argue that such a diagnosis inappropriately pathologizes gender incongruence, while others contend that the diagnosis makes it easier for transgender people to access necessary medical treatment. Intersex is an umbrella term used to describe people with differences in reproductive anatomy, chromosomes, or hormones that don't typically fit definitions of male and female. Intersex can refer to a number of natural variations, some of them laid out by Interact. Being intersex is not the same as being non-binary or transgender, which are terms typically related to gender identity. And moving on to the panel discussion portion of tonight's talk, I would like to address Taté. Taté, could you please explain what it means to you personally to be a two-spirit individual? I do apologize that two-spirit wasn't in the glossary of terms, and we'll make up for that by having you explain it from your own personal experience if you prefer.
It's not surprising that it wasn't in your glossary. That happens quite a bit with Indigenous anything. But I want to start by saying, Ampitu washte, chante washte, iuha na pechuja pikusto, jisha tatewi imajiapi, wakpa washte imantahan. That's just sort of a nice grounding exercise and cultural affirmation to introduce myself in Lakota, which is my culture and heritage, in which I'll be discussing my identity, I guess, from those foundations. My pronouns are they, them. I'm joining you today from Ataman Pipash lands of Phoenix, so it's really hot here. Image description real quick too. I'm a fat queer femme, light skin, long dark hair worn in a braid over this shoulder here, my right shoulder. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, round glasses that I hope make me look unpretentious, but quirky, of course. And I have a wicked resting matriarch face, but I'm generally happier than I seem. So moving right along, two-spirit was a term coined in 1990. A group of queer Indigenous folks got together and said, we need space and identity that can speak to our specific experiences as queer Indigenous folks. It was at a time when a lot of terms were being, I think, thought up and useful to folks in terms of how they identified outside of course, binaries, but also even just queer or gay or lesbian or whatever it might be. And so two-spirit is following loosely an Anishinaabe term that essentially has been umbrella-ized to mean an Indigenous queer person. Always want to say right on the bat that two-spirit is only for Indigenous people. It's if you're not Indigenous or you're not doing things that build and uplift Indigenous communities, then it's not for you to use ever. Full stop. Pretty simple, but we still have lots of folks that are like, it speaks to my spirit animal while they're out there at music festival. That's totally inappropriate and harmful to us as we're still reclaiming this for ourselves. I describe myself as two-spirit and queer. So with that, a lot of natives who are queer don't identify as two-spirit. So it's not an automatic thing for our communities. A lot of tribes have significant accountability measures in place before someone can even think about calling themselves what would be akin to two-spirit. So in Lakota, my own ceremonies have me described as Wianwitko. So it's not two-spirit that they call me. My translation for that is crazy woman. There we go. Which in and of itself is really a dud of an explanation in terms of that translation, right? We lose so much in translation. What else there that I can tell you real quick? But I'm also not here to police, say, especially young people using the term two-spirit. So if they haven't gone through ceremony, that's not my place to say, you're not two-spirit. As a young queer youth, I needed something like two-spirit for myself. That I wasn't able to access until my mid-20s. So I can say the power of having a term like two-spirit to use and embrace yourself around is so important. it's not binary. So don't get caught up in that two for two-spirit. Think TOO, right? As in more than the sum of any one expectation. I have a poem about that specifically. We're not just words. We're whole ass galaxies, roaming and interconnecting with each other, all different ways. And those of us who have studied identity and especially this part of ourselves understand that it's ever changing. And so a lot of, at least my Lakota foundations, there's room for that kind of change. And then just want to leave you with the fact that two-spirit isn't, we come from a colonial lens when we think of gender and sexuality. And for a lot of Native communities, and again, I can't speak for every one of those 574, or whatever it is now, tribes that are part of just the United States, and that's not even mentioning Canada or Indigenous folks of Central and South America. We have completely different understandings of what gender and sexuality even is. But the overall theme as we connect with each other and learn from each other is that we had way more space in our communities pre-colonization for folks of diverse identities, and not just space, but roles and responsibilities that meant something. So when we talk about two-spirit being just for Indigenous communities, that's a big demand, because it's been taken from us, right? Boarding schools and land acquisition, just straight up genocide has really removed a lot of these understandings from our own people. And so it's really important that we have those in our possession, if anything else. Yeah, I think that's a great way to start, and we can talk about more later. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for clarifying kind of the boundaries and the really important cultural factors going into that. I appreciate that. All right, and next we have a question for Tajahnaé. Tajahnaé, could you please explain what it means to you personally to be an agender individual?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question all day. I didn't know you were going to ask it, but it was something that I've been reflecting on for a bit to try and at least put into words. And so for me, you did a great job with the naming the definitions. But for me, I do feel genderless. And the best way to describe myself personally, I feel beyond gender. I don't really feel that there is a label to identify how I express myself. I think agender is the closest thing. I feel without gender. I exist without gender or any constructs. I exist outside the binary. And I think agender is the closest thing to that. But I do identify beyond the gender, beyond the male and female binary. And the best part of it is just being able to label myself or name myself or just exist as Tajahnaé. Still hard to undo the social constructs when people look at me and presume my gender. But for me, I am beyond these gender binaries. So I just get to exist as Tajahnaé, as labelless, as genderless. And I just get to exist without any of those societal pressures that come with being labeled as X or Y or Z. Still work in progress. I still get perceived as such, and we're still working through that. But it's comfortable to know how I identify, because it allows me to live as authentically as possible, which is any way I want.
Thank you for expressing and explaining your personal experience outside the gender binary. That is a very freeing experience, as I've learned that, non-binary can include so many things, and that umbrella term has so many different experiences within it, and agender is one that I'm still learning about myself. So yeah, thank you. All right, our next question is for Leslie. Leslie, could you please explain your personal experience of what it means to you to be a non-binary individual?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cody. Evening, everyone. I identify as non-binary, and within that, I also identify as gender fluid and genderqueer. Historically, here in the United States, we are measured by a rigid binary gender system, as you stated in your introduction. Starting even before we are born, we are identified as one or the other. But gender identity continues to prove that it doesn't always fit into two nice, neat little boxes. Non-binary is a collection of genders that are outside of these two boxes of man and woman. I am not a woman, but I have a lot of things in common with women. And I am not a man, but I have a lot of things in common with men. And I am not limited by the definition of either of these two predominant genders. This is what makes me a non-binary individual. Within this definition is a lot of flexibility and a lot of room for creativity. Some days I experience closer connection with women, and some days I experience closer connection with men. But regardless of the day or situation, I do not experience a sense of belonging in either of these groups. When I do have the good fortune to get to spend time with other genderqueer and non-binary people, I do find that sense of belonging there. And this is how I identify myself as a non-binary individual.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, and we'll be moving on to the next topic of discussion, which is a question for everyone. We'll stay in the same order of speakers, but the question is, what is your story of realization that you yourself were living the experience of a person outside the gender binary? What sort of thoughts and emotional processes did this entail, if you feel like sharing?
And starting with me, great. I don't want to get into all the trauma of being a teenager and coming out to my parents in a therapy session in Bismarck, North Dakota, of all places. Yes, that's right, folks. Bismarck, North Dakota, the epicenter of acceptance. I'm just kidding. It wasn't. I was put in a group home. It's a state that firmly believes in conversion therapy. It's really, really difficult space to be learning about yourself as a kid. So coming out, that was tough because I was raised in a Catholic family. So when people are like, always knew, right? I didn't realize there were options like non-binary back in the 90s. I didn't realize Two-Spirit was even a thing. We didn't really talk about that. Anyone of queer who showed queerness, I guess, was more of a joke or a funny thing, even within our own Native communities. There's a term, winkta in Lakota, that's I think more accepted these days as a nice term, but when I was growing up, it just meant an effeminate man, and you made fun of that, which is not okay. So as a Catholic, of course, there was a lot of terrible things wrong with me. Guess what I did with my Barbies? So as a teenager, coming to terms with like my feelings for a best friend really ate away at a lot of what I was dealing with as a teen. So it came out expressed in very traumatic ways. So it was, though, all that said, being in the group home and in Bismarck, North Dakota, I mean, almost 100% of the kids that were in this in state care are Native. This is true in a lot of Native communities or states with larger Native communities. Is we might make up a small percentage of the overall population, but we are over disproportionately in their prison systems and foster care systems. So that was the case with me. And so with that, they gave us quite a bit of like cultural experiences, not necessarily knowing what they were doing, but one of them actually really helped me. I went to a sweat lodge, and the person who ran it, the medicine man, he gave us a story of one of our deities, Taté, who's a white buffalo calf woman, who essentially gave all the Lakota people our ceremonies that we still practice today. And in his statement, the thing that really resonated with me was first of all, women have power. Women should be respected. And if you don't, you will be smited. It's a really great story, but it's kind of timely, so I'm not going to share it with you. But look up my website if you want to learn more. I have lots of poems about it. So in any case, I came away with a really stronger feeling about who I was, and that my own culture was here to accept me, not just as a femme person, but as especially as a queer person. I mean, the medicine man made a lot of space for a lot of different identity, and he even said like gay and lesbian, which was amazing. So and one of the first times I'd heard that, right? So fast forward several years, college, I'm taking a gender and sexuality course, and my white professor says, well, Taté knows she's a two-spirit, right? And yet started using my pronouns. And I was like, what's two-spirit? And of course I know everything about being Native, because that's what Native students are, the encyclopedias for all things Native. And her intentions were good, and I do appreciate that she brought it up, because I didn't know what two-spirit was. And so I went back to my own people, my own tribe, and started learning a lot of knowledge and stories. I mean, years and years of study alongside elders, and eventually undergoing pretty intense ceremony to acknowledge that we on Wheatco that I mentioned in my the first part of this, because that was my role now with our community, with my family. Was I have two-spirit medicine, essentially this we on Wheatco medicine that is needed for our people, and that for me expresses itself as storytelling. And so I work with students, I work with families, and a big piece of that is telling the story of our queer people, and that's not just a box to check for me, right? That's an understanding that I am accountable to my people as we on Wheatco. So that's where I feel two-spirit really like that's my emotional response to two-spirit, is that I have a responsibility to my people.
Are we gonna? Okay, I'm gonna go. Awesome.
Sorry, my microphone failed for a second, but yes.
You're good.
Yeah.
Perfect. So for me, I didn't have the language until I got to college, but I knew that I just didn't lean strongly into masculine or femininity at all. And there are people who know that they identify with the gender that they were assigned with at birth, and they lean into that. And I just didn't really feel that. And I'm not just saying like, oh, I was the tomboy. I felt like I was everything and I was nothing in between. Like I didn't mind wearing anything. I really liked wearing dresses, and I also really liked wearing pantsuits. And I wanted to wear a wedding dress and a pantsuit on my wedding day. And these things obviously are just expressions and don't mean anything that have to do with gender, but I just didn't really lean anywhere. I just felt like I was, how I describe myself now and how I would describe myself when I was younger, I just felt like a void. Like I'll express myself in any way. There's not really much to label me as. And so I didn't really have that. And so I just navigated as she, her, and I was comfortable with that. I just didn't really lean heavily into that. Like it wasn't something that I felt strongly about, but I wasn't upset when people labeled me that either. And so college introduced me to a lot of language that just made sense. But I still felt like, especially when I learned terms of trans and non-binary and agender, I was still like, but nah, that's not me. Like I'm still she, her with the sprinkle of like everything and nothing. Like I was just so adamant, like that wasn't me. Don't know why. I wish I could have a conversation with my younger self and ask why I didn't lean more into that, but I just didn't feel like that was me. And then maybe junior year at college, I was like, I think I'm gender fluid. I think my pronouns are any, all, because I felt comfortable with any and all pronouns. And I did that for a while, but I found myself getting triggered and really frustrated because when I would explain that I'm gender fluid and my pronouns are any, all, people would still use she, her. And in my head, it's just like, yes, you are correct, but that doesn't really feel good. And I didn't feel like people were recognizing me outside of gender. I didn't feel like people recognized my gender fluidity at all. I just feel like they saw me as she, her. Tajahnaé accepts any, all pronouns. I'm going to call you she, her. I don't think anybody really took, and I don't think anybody still, well, I shouldn't say anybody. I don't think some people unpack the binary that we have grown up in. I think a lot of people still use male and female as an indicator, and everything else is just like a learned behavior. Whereas you should be unpacking these constructs, these social constructs, and unpacking how you interact and how you perceive gender. And I don't think anybody was doing that with me. I think they were like, Tajahnaé is gender fluid, she, her, she still looks like a woman. And that was frustrating. I think people were doing that to respect me, but they didn't see me fully. They didn't see me into existence. So that was an uncomfortable time. I still didn't feel like agender or trans was the label for me. I was like, yeah, but that's still not me. There are people who have had these epiphanies and have been feeling this for a long time. That's not me. I'm okay with gender fluidity. And I think I didn't see myself in the community. And I don't know, I just didn't see myself. I didn't think that was for me. I thought to myself, like, if I join, maybe I'm taking up space for someone who has like another story that's better or worse than mine, which is not a way to view yourself in any kind of community, because all are welcomed, especially when you are unpacking gender and your femininity and your masculinity. Like, if you are going that far to really challenge yourself when it comes to gender, you are welcome into the space. And I was one of those people, but I still didn't think that that was for me. And so I went with gender fluid all through the pandemic. People were still calling me any, all. There was only like one person who would dare teeter into they, them, but heaven forbid anybody call me he, him, because that wasn't a thing. And so it was just really frustrating how I didn't feel perceived, and I was frustrated with myself. And I just kept asking myself, like, why doesn't this feel right? Like, why doesn't any all feel good? Like, what am I needing? And so I didn't come out until February of this year, actually. And I really sat down with my spouse, and I wrote a lot of my journal about this journey and what feels good to me. And I think the last line in my journal that I wrote, it was like, there is no label that can contain me. Like, there is no gender label for me. And you should lean into that. And then I shaved my head the next day, and now we're here, and I keep shaving my head. And I'm getting ready to buy a second binder because the first binder didn't work. And I'm ready to just lean into androgyny and genderless and being beyond gender. It's been a long time coming, and it feels really healing to connect with my younger self and affirm my younger self too. Like, you weren't wrong when you identified as gender fluid. You're trying to find your way. You're trying to find space and things that made sense to you. So you absolutely were not wrong. And it was beautiful that you were questioning your gender, no matter what age that you were. It just took you a little time. It just took you some isolation, and it took some validation, and it really took you shaving your head to really figure out where you needed to go. And so it was a long journey. And it was nice. And it's nice to know that there's language, even though I don't really need language. I could just be like, just call me Tajahnaé. My pronouns are Tajahnaé. I don't want to be labeled as anything else. But it's good to know that there is language and community to help validate what I've been feeling for so long. Because I think language is really what I needed. And obviously the openness of the community. As soon as I came out as non-binary, agender, most people were like, yeah, that makes sense. But a lot of people were supportive too. And so it's good to know that people saw me before I even knew who I was. And it's good to still feel affirmed in this trend, because I'm still evolving. I don't know what's going to happen in the next few years, and I'm excited to see. And so I'm just appreciative of language and community at this point in my life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, for explaining that experience. And Leslie, would you like to continue?
Absolutely. I think that I have always known intuitively that my assigned gender was wrong. The conscious realization of this has unfolded over a lifetime of experiences. I was born into a white, middle-class, Midwestern family in the United States. And I was assigned female at birth and was expected to grow up to be a woman. As a small child, I was really into everything pink, white lace, makeup, sparkles, and dolls. And these were things that I was told were girl things. But I didn't get along well with the other girls. Instead, I spent most of my time playing outdoors with the boys. And we would play Power Rangers, Ninja Turtles, Star Wars. I was labeled as a child a tomboy. And as a small child, I had no problem with any of this, but things got to be a bit spicier when I hit puberty. That was a significantly different experience. I was really deeply surprised and alarmed by the effects of puberty. I felt violated by the unwanted attention these changes elicited from people around me, and I just wanted to disappear. I tried to hide my body by wearing extra large size clothing. It didn't seem to help. Everybody knew, and everyone was excited about my womanhood except for me. I was miserable and so really very lonely. And I became violent against my body. I had a lot of dysphoria. There was no one that I could talk to about what I was experiencing, but I had a big aha moment when I was watching Disney's Mulan in 1998 when I was 12 years old. While that story was not about non-binary gender, it was the first time I knew that mine wasn't an isolated experience. The idea of any sort of gender outside of the binary was not a concept that I grew up with at all. Despite my budding understanding, I decided to pursue my pre-prescribed lot in life as a pious heterosexual married Christian woman in my late teens and early 20s. That was an absolute disaster, of which the mental health repercussions have been very deep. As an adult, though, I continued to experience a dissonance between who I was and cultural expectations of that. Medical care attempts went a little strange because I found through trial and error that taking estrogen supplements in the form of birth control pills made me very, very sick. And supplementing my testosterone production made me feel better. Socially, I still developed very few friendships with women, and I felt like an imposter in women's circles. I simply didn't have much in common with them, I found. Even though the term genderqueer emerged in the mid-1990s, I didn't run into the concept or anything even similar until maybe 2018, which is not that long ago. I don't remember the specifics by which I came that came to me, but I imagine that it probably came to me by way of my pagan community. Where there's a lot of gender diverse representation in the pagan community. I came out in 2020 during Project Q&A's virtual Pride event, having fully realized and accepted myself as I am. Understanding about myself and knowing who I am has brought me gentler attitudes towards myself, my body, and my relationships.
All right, thank you so much to all three of you for opening up and expressing your experiences. Those can be difficult memories to sort through, so thank you all for your willingness to share. The next discussion topic, I firmly believe that existence as a gender diverse individual is a blessing to be grateful for. What are some of our experiences in gender diverse? What are some of our aspects or experiences rather in gender diversity you have lived that have elicited true queer joy and gratitude for your gender identity? And let's start with Leslie this time. so that there's not so much pressure on the order.
Absolutely. What brings me the most joy about being non-binary is the freedom, especially in relationships with others. No one can tell me what my gender is supposed to look like, how my gender is supposed to behave, what kind of lifestyle best fits my gender, what kind of careers I belong in, or what sorts of relationships my gender is allowed to have. When I talk to people, I get to speak to them as if I am a person and they are a person, without letting all of the typical gender norms of my culture get in the way. This way, I can show up more authentically, and I can receive them in their authenticity. As a non-binary person, there aren't rules on who I can hang out with based on my gender or their gender. And I really feel like the freedom is in other areas as well, but very especially in the area of relationships. I have found a lot of joy and appreciation for being non-binary.
All right. Thank you so much. Tajahnaé, would you like to go next?
Yeah, similar to Leslie, there is a lot of freedom. And when you start to tear down the walls and barriers of gender and social constructs, you start to do that with a lot of other things. And I exist as a Black person, and so the race also comes into play. Like there are already a lot of systems that I was challenging just because I'm navigating as a Black person first. And then you start to challenge your gender and how things are supposed to look and not supposed to look. Once you challenge that, then everything is up for grabs, including like monogamy. And what does freedom look like in that? Aside from that, I really love what Leslie said about like living authentically and being more gentle to yourself. Because I know that because I am authentic with how I live and my experiences, I'm a lot more gentler with myself. And that leaves a lot more space to be gentle with others. And so I think radical empathy has been such a huge thing. Empathy has always been a big thing for me, but once like you are gentle with yourself, you are just so much more capable of being gentler with people who are navigating these systems and who may be still stuck in the binary and may need a little bit more help. Don't exert all your energy on it though, because some people are happy where they're at when it comes to the gender binary, and that's cool with them. But being gentle with myself is also being gentle with my community and those around me, and I also love that as well.
Awesome. Taté, would you like to go next?
I think I'm your only option left. Yeah. My joy comes from my culture. My culture has embraced who I am in all ways. So, and when we talk about like, experiences specifically, I'm part of a Two-Spirit group here in the Phoenix Valley. Something that I never would have thought possible as a teenager or even in college, and to have elders on our committee, and we're planning Two-Spirit powwow and being in parades and leading critical cultural conversations in the community. It's nice to be seen, right? Nice to be experienced and witnessed by the general public, because that's just never been the case. When I talk about genocide, I mean genocide. We're really just climbing through some of our ashes right now, literally at boarding schools. So to have a committee like this is such a powerful element, and gives me such joy. I'm really hoping we get some youth coming on board too, because then we got a full circle with elders and adults and then youth coming through, making our communities better. I also work for a tribal school district, and it's just a professional in general. It's really tough to get other professionals to use my correct pronouns. And so every day I get to come out, right? Over and over again. Taté, they, them, remember to please use my correct pronouns in every email, or even when you're just talking about me and I'm not there, please. And what's, well, that doesn't bring me joy, but what does bring me joy is when I get to go into classrooms and work with youth, and just one mention at the top of my intro of my pronouns and the kids get it. I mean, we're talking from the little Head Start tags all the way up to our high school kids who are also using pronouns in these ways to identify themselves. And I think that gives me joy at the hope of future generations being a lot more accepting and embracing of people's identities and people as they come, right? Not just identities, but just as they are. Last year, I published my first poetry book, The Trickster Rights. And one of the poems in there is I Like Tacos. And it is meant to be a euphemism, if you weren't sure. But it brings me a lot of joy to give that poem to my own people. I've presented it several places. I was even on a podcast run by a non-native person who was convinced I was really talking about tacos. And so we had a podcast about food, and I had to sort of interrupt her midway and say, I'm talking about oral sex, right? And so it was just oh my gosh. But when I present this poem to my own people, and as in native people, native audiences, they get it. And when I remember my first telling of that, there were two little aunties in the front row, and they were just laughing like, oh, the Bannock booty and the Bannock boobies, and oh, right. And they just got it. And one of the last times I presented it, there were some native young people, like middle school age, who came up and said, I like tacos too. And it was just such a awesome moment, right? Like existing in a space where we can talk about this and not have to fear the wrath of God or the wrath of conversion. So that gave me a lot of joy. The best piece of joy that I've experienced is with my own kid. I have a soon to be 15-year-old as of next Monday. And they came out as trans non-binary during the pandemic. And that's also when they had their first moon time, their first menstruation. And so what was great about that is the Tajáhnaé ceremony in Lakota is specific to folks who have a uterus and have a menstrual cycle every month. And one of the cool things that happened with that is the people who ran it were very embracing of my kiddos' pronouns, of their new name. We've, by the way, just celebration, we got their official name change this summer. So that was a process here in Arizona, but we did it and it was awesome. No one died, thankfully. But as a couple years ago when we were doing this puberty ceremony, there was a lot of, I think, pressure from my kiddo as someone who was claiming or trying to sort of live in this new identity as trans non-binary, to be more masculine than they had been. So the new name that they originally wanted, or even just the clothes they wanted to wear, a binder even, we did all of it, and nothing really felt good on them, from the name to the clothes to the binder. And the Tajáhnaé ceremony was such a powerful piece because it did away with those colonial notions of gender, right? We didn't have those. There was no such thing as, well, your hair is short, therefore you must do this. You have a penis, therefore you must do this. And so to have an elder express that to a queer kid was, at least for my queer kid, was such a powerful moment, because it sort of shed some expectations of what being trans non-binary was supposed to mean for them. It didn't mean having a super traditional strong mask name, or it didn't mean having to dress a certain way. It didn't mean having to have a certain haircut, which I think both my other panelists have said is very freeing, right? That our culture embraces and surrounds us with this acceptance, and that regardless of how you're presenting, that your community wraps itself around you. And so if you build up community, the community builds you up. And I that was such a a good thing to have at the outset, because yeah, it freed them from expectations, because even though you're shedding binaries, there's still a lot of especially here in the United States, expectation of what queerness looks like, what it does, how it behaves, and even within our own communities. You know, you have to be this if you said you're this. You know, for me, it's you know, why do you have a kid if you're gay? I mean, you know how sex works, I hope. No, we've had some. Never mind, I'm getting off on tangent. But so take some sex ed courses if you can in a good state, not Arizona. So you know, Indigenous understandings of gender and sexuality can't be understood using colonial metrics. You know, when you hear someone talk about LGBTQ folks, you know, plus being accepted in Native communities, I mean, it's kind of a redundancy, right? It's like saying, well, we also like food and we breathe air. You know, this acceptance is just sort of is. So many roles and places and spaces exist within Native communities for folks like me, for folks like my kid. I'm not saying anything's perfect, because we've got that colonial drug tastes so good for a lot of folks, but I think when we go back to our origins and we go back to what our language and our lands are telling us, I mean, if you've ever stepped outside, you know nature is queer. So when we say land back, we're saying we want our queerness back too. We want our identities back. We want our language back, and that language has space for us. That land has space for us. Our communities have space for us. So my own culture gives me joy.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. We are actually running a little low on time, so we don't have time to discuss all of the topics I originally planned for. I hope that's all right with everyone. If there's one in particular you want to jump in with your answer, like something you really feel we should discuss, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left for each of us to give a statement. It's up to you which one you'll respond to. Tajahnaé, what would you like to respond to? We have our panelist discussion topics, and I'll let you take the floor for that. Tajahnaé, can you hear me all right? Audio is being tricky. Okay,
Yeah,
there you
it
go.
froze.
Okay.
Sorry, it froze on
Okay.
my.
Oh, sorry. We have 3 discussion topics left. Is there one in particular you would like to take and discuss at length? We've got about 2 or 3
Not one
minutes
in
per person.
particular.
Okay, no
I'll
worries.
answer it back.
Okay. Leslie, Taté, do you have one in particular you would like to discuss more at length? All right, no worries.
I mean, I
So,
can. I
okay,
thought I
yeah.
saw Leslie's mic off, so I was gonna let him
No
go.
worries. All right,
Uh,
please.
yeah. So I live in Arizona. In states like ours, we go through a disgusting and harmful annual ritual in our legislatures to debate the humanity and identity of queer people. And whenever I go to testify against homophobic and transphobic laws and lawmakers, I always remind them that they're trying to force these gross beliefs on lands that have never made such demands on its people, especially our youth. In fact, whenever you step foot in these so-called United States, you're stepping on lands that have always embraced and uplifted queer people, queer love, queer experiences, for how much stronger these people make our communities. Settler governments are guests here always and have run out their welcome on these lands. So when we say hashtag land back, when we say hashtag language back, when we say hashtag two spirits back, this is what we're talking about. It's inconceivable that we would be trying to establish these gross practices on lands that would never have done this and have never done this. So stop. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's an important message to share. Absolutely. All right, so if that is all we have for now, I will open up the floor for the private Q&A in just a few moments. The link is in the comments section on our Facebook Live. If anyone would like to join us after we close down the live stream for that private Q&A discussion, feel free. So let's continue with the closing comments. So thank you to all who tuned in and our partners at the Independence Public Library and our funding sources, the Independence Area Community Chest and the American Library Association. Thank you to Taté Walker, Tajahnaé Stocker, and Leslie Fox for a wonderful presentation. If you would like to continue the conversation with Taté, Tajahnaé, and Leslie on Zoom, please follow the link in the comment. Be sure to tune in next month for our Q&A talks. We will be meeting again on Wednesday, September 20th, 2023. We have yet to confirm next month's speaker, but we will be launching out promotional social posts as soon as we have that confirmed. If you would like to find out more about Project Q&A, our work, or to view past Q&A talks, visit our website and follow us on social media, please. To support the work we are doing in rural communities, please consider making a tax-deductible donation today. Thank you for watching our Q&A talk this month. And again, if you have any questions for our presenter, follow the link in the comments. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.